and welcome into this week's episode of our book club for Star Wars Aftermath, Empire's End. If you are not familiar with this series, go ahead and click here and it will take you back to the beginning of our exploration of this book. If you would rather, this has been an exploration of the third book in a trilogy. You can click this link and it will take you back to our journey through the first book in the trilogy. But if you're just joining us for this video, congratulations, you're watching the last one. So this is our last video for Star Wars Aftermath, Empire's End. I went back and looked. We spent 18 videos, which means 18 weeks on the first book, 17 videos, so 17 weeks on the second, and this video will mark 18 weeks, 18 videos, so that's a total of 53 videos all about the Star Wars Aftermath trilogy by Chuck Wendig. It has taken us a year and a couple of weeks to get through it. It's been a lot of fun, so to those of you who have been with me since the beginning, thank you so much. I wouldn't have kept going without your comments and your engagement with the video as we went on. And if you're just finding this video well after it's been published, well, thank you for finding the series along the way. It always makes me happy to know when a video has found life after I initially throw it up into the internet. But enough with that. Let us get into talking about the end of the book, the end of the Aftermath trilogy. We're going to be discussing chapters 37, 38, and then the epilogue. And this may very well be the longest video we have done in the series, because boy, is there a lot to talk about. Let's jump into 37, where we had left off. We had left off by cutting away to the New Republic with Senjur and Mon Mothma having just survived an attack on her life. But now we finally get back to Jakku.
We're going back to Jakku, that's where.
And on Jakku, we have the resolution of the conflict between Sloane and Nora and Rax. So here, we had left Sloane chasing after Rax. We find her continuing her chase against Rax. Rax is beat up, he's hurt, he's injured, he's not sure he's going to make it, and Sloane shoots him a couple of times, and they kind of have their final words. And it was really intense, because you might have expected Rax to have words of anger, to have words of defeat, to have words of, how dare you best me, or, we're just two losers here, or something like that. And instead, he looks at Sloane, having just killed him, and tells her, like, you're the real outcast. An outcast, of course, referring to the space chess game piece, not as an insult. That she will be the true instrument of reforging the Empire, and kind of reinstills this point of destiny. So even though this woman has betrayed him and killed him, he doesn't see it as this horrible thing as much as he sees it as her proving her worth, which is the exact kind of twisted, dark-sidey Sith mentality that Palpatine would have infused in Rax. So what we see here is that Rax is actually a true believer. He is that zealous that he actually believes in this cause more than he necessarily believes in his own gain. He certainly believes in his own gain, but that is secondary to the greater cause, and he challenges Sloane to go out, start a new game, find a new game board, be the person that does this, and then Rax dies. Sloane then moves on to shut down the destruction of the planet of Jakku. So this is a part of the contingency that does not succeed. As I said, we already knew. Jakku makes it because we've seen it in another Star Wars film. Nora wakes up from her unconsciousness, has trouble coming to terms with the fact that her husband is dead, and goes to find Sloane. And they have this final confrontation. This time they're not slugging it out. This is a point of, is Nora going to trust Sloane, or is Nora not going to trust Sloane? Is Nora going to pick justice? Is she going to pick revenge? Is she going to pick something in between? And that ultimately becomes the difference between the two of them. Sloane tells Nora that she should go. She should leave. In case Sloane is not successful, she should find her son and get off Jakku. Sloane says, you have your son, you have your New Republic, all I had was the Empire. Basically admitting that right now she has nothing. The only thing she ever devoted her life to is gone, and now all she has is this chance of maybe rebuilding it in some sort of weird, vague plan that she doesn't really know about. And Nora says, I feel sorry for you, and Sloane surprisingly is not insulted by that. And these two women have this moment, and Nora ultimately leaves Sloane to figure out what's going on. Sloane got her revenge on Rax. She kills Rax, and as such inherits in a way, his destiny. Nora chooses really neither justice nor revenge. You know, she doesn't kill Sloane out of revenge, but she also doesn't seek to capture Sloane. She kind of sets that choice away entirely, walks away, and goes to her family. So again, we see these two women who have been on these parallel tracks throughout the books, all three books, even though Nora didn't always know who Sloane was, and even after she did, Sloane didn't know who Nora was for a very long time. But they were being sent down this kind of converging destiny paths, and we see them split now. Yeah, like if it was a giant X, you know, they finally hit, and now they're going their own ways. So Nora deciding to go on this new path, she staggers back, finds her husband's body. She's adamant that the one thing she's gonna do is give him a proper burial. So she's choosing this kind of familial decision over a New Republic decision. This is symbolic of that, even though she says, you know, it's ultimately because she wants Timon to be able to mourn someone. But that is the place of mind, her state of mind as she goes to make these choices. She gets out, she finds a shuttle won't take off, so she's near death again, and Jazz and Embo shows up to save her. So Jazz has been off doing whatever Jazz has been doing, and swoops in to save Nora at the end of the day, as she kind of has been this whole book. We get to see Nora there, and we will see more from Jazz here a little bit later in the book, basically talking about what she's been able to work on with these bounty hunters. But that's effectively chapter 37. 37 is the end of the story. It's the end of the plot itself. It's how everything gets resolved. The final chapter, and then the epilogue, is the where are they now, what happens to them portion of the book. And boy does a lot happen, and boy does a lot happen in a little bit of time. So I'm going to try to get through this as best as I can, because there's a lot of really, really great things to talk about here. One of the big things we get is peace treaty. Masamada shows up. He says that he'll sign something that creates peace, and as a condition of that peace, the Empire will dissolve. So we haven't seen Masamada since he's been saved by the Peace Brigade, I'm pretty sure. You might remember earlier in the trilogy, he tried to surrender, and Mon Mothma would not accept it. She would not accept... Well, he tried to have a peace treaty, and Mon Mothma would not accept it unless he surrendered. And that's when she called him on his bluff that he basically had no authority to surrender. Well, now, because the Empire is basically wiped out at Jakku, he does kind of have this authority, at least a symbolic authority, to say, nope, the Empire's done. Now, ultimately, that doesn't happen. It is in form, but you have a lot of stormtroopers who are left on Jakku or scattered throughout the galaxy who don't want to surrender to the New Republic, so though there is no longer an Empire, there are still Imperials that are dealing with what's going to happen there, because pretty much anybody who was a part of the military construct, anybody who is an officer or a specifically anybody who's an officer is declared a war criminal. Anybody who is a non-combatant has like a provisional pardon, which basically means if they don't turn their backs on the New Republic, like, they can be pardoned because they weren't, you know, necessarily a part of the killing. I would imagine within the New Republic that was controversial. There were probably a lot of people who wanted to see all of the Imperials see justice or revenge. But it's also something of an olive branch, because I think Mon Mothma is just looking for peace in the galaxy, and it is a good way to achieve that. One of the many things that I thought was interesting here was how Ameda became a figurehead for a government on Coruscant, and like that was his kind of gift for surrendering. And it's so interesting in new canon compared to Legends how little impact Coruscant has. So these were really the only books post-Jedi that I'm aware of that have dealt with drastically with Coruscant. That Coruscant has kind of symbolically been considered non-consequential, more imperial, people aren't as worried about it. The new canon as a whole hasn't done a lot with it, which is very different than what happened in Legends. In Legends, Coruscant was a huge deal. The X-Wing novels by Michael Stackpole dealt with largely the taking of Coruscant and the taking back of Coruscant. That is where the New Republic government gets set back up, is back on Coruscant, and it was such a big deal in Legends. And it's a planet where even if you're not into the expanded universe, it's something that fans have a lot of connection to. I remember when The Force Awakens came out and Hosnian Prime was destroyed, a lot of people actually thought that was Coruscant. I was a little confused about it myself, to be honest. The first time I saw The Force Awakens, the second time I saw Force Awakens, I was able to figure it out because I wasn't just in awe and drooling over the spectacle, and I was able to follow the story. But that was one thing that kind of confused people. I remember talking to a lot of people who were like, I can't believe they just destroyed Coruscant and didn't talk about it. Well, they didn't destroy Coruscant, but you saw a planet that was mostly a city and decided it was Coruscant. So Coruscant is so ingrained in the consciousness of Star Wars fans, either through the expanded universe or just because of the prequels, where it's one of the few planets that we've seen in multiple films. It's Coruscant and Tatooine and Naboo are like the only planets I can think of off the top of my head that we've seen in multiple Star Wars films. And then to just have it not be as used, and I think it's interesting to see that deviation, and I think that deviation, it's neither good nor bad, it's just a signifier of what the new canon is trying to do, and how it's trying to blaze its own trail. And so that was something small and this one little part of this whole book that I found interesting, is how they're moving away, and that it's Chandrila and it's Hosnian Prime that become the important planets within the sequel trilogy lore era. Then we see a little bit on Jakku, which is something I already talked about. Some of the stormtroopers didn't stop fighting. The New Republic is having issues because they now have more prisoners than they know what to do with. Of course, if it was the Empire would execute the prisoners, but the New Republic is not going to do that, so now they have to figure out what they're going to do with all of these people. And it's a very interesting question that I'm really looking forward to see be explored more, just because they haven't released a lot of content in this era. We haven't gotten to it. I'm sure we will get to it more. We see a little bit of it in Alphabet Squadron, for those of you who've read Alphabet Squadron by Alexander Freed, but the first Alphabet Squadron book actually takes place before this one. So even what we're seeing there is that they're already dealing with what to do with prisoners and people who've turned on the Empire, and to now have this even more so because the Empire itself has dissolved. Then we go to Brenton, who is buried on Akiva. Going back to Akiva is important because it's where the entire trilogy started, and it started with a family that was broken because a father disappeared, and now the father is being buried on that homeworld. And then just to add to it, while they're burying Brenton, Timon buries the only piece of bones he has with his father, hoping that they can work together and Bones can protect him and whatever lies beyond for the two characters. It's interesting to me that they kill Brenton. Not to talk over a sentimental moment, but there's not much else to say besides it was sentimental, and it was hard hitting. But it's interesting that they chose to kill Brenton, and the characters they chose to kill in this book are interesting to me, and what that means to Nora. Because Nora never had closure from when her husband went missing, and she had to deal with the fact that she assumed he was dead. Then to find Brenton and try to get that closure, and she can't because he was dealing with the mind control. And then to find Brenton again and have him try to give her closure, and she wouldn't accept it because she didn't trust him yet. So basically, she went her whole life, not her whole life, but that section of her life where he was missing, never got closure, had him back, never got closure, and now he's passed. Nora is a character I have a lot of mixed feelings on. I know a lot of people adore her. She kind of drives me crazy a lot throughout this book, but I've kind of found in this rereading how much she really gets dumped on. I mean, the poor woman never has a chance to work through anything that has happened to her whole life, almost to a point of it's like she literally can't catch a break. Like, the only good thing that happens to her, she at least has her repaired relationship with her son by the end of this book. Otherwise, what did she do? Like, the whole book, she was on a quest to kill a woman, ultimately decides to not kill a woman, is on a quest to get her husband back, and doesn't get her husband back, and doesn't even get time with her husband because the one chance she had, she didn't take it. I feel like her story arc shouldn't be done. I feel like after watching what she has gone through these books, like, the woman deserves a chance for something. We will find out here later in the book that she becomes a flight instructor, and maybe she can get something through there. That she wants to spend more time with Wedge, that she and Wedge are having this kind of budding relationship, but she's not ready for that right now, obviously, because her husband just passed. So we're left with that could happen in the future, even though it's not going to happen right now. I just think it's a very interesting writing choice to basically have her not get anything she was after in the whole book, other than her relationship with Timon, which is is no small thing to get a relationship back with her son, and I'm glad she at least had that one win. But it's one of the things that makes me really want to revisit these characters, and I don't know if Wendig would be back to do it. I don't know if somebody else would get the chance to do it, but there's so much more to tell with her. Like, the plot lines for her in this book came to a conclusion. I want to see her actually get the chance to grow or be different, or like deal with things in a way she didn't get to do in these books. But to rewind back to our other characters, I was getting a little ahead of myself there. Jazz returns, and she is able to actually get the pardons for Dengar and Embo and the rest, thanks to Singer. I like the way it was put. He's like, thanks to my friend who's now high confidant of the Chancellor, apparently. It wasn't those exact words, but I liked her kind of sarcasm and the way she thought about it. But because of that, she was actually able to make good on her promise, and she was actually able to form this new crew so she can go and work on her debts. So we think that Jazz is getting this really happy ending. And then she goes to find Jom, and it's at this point where it's like, oh yeah, Jom is a person. I looked it up because it's been a while. I remembered this was coming. We last spoke to Jom on the paperback edition on page 294 in a book that is 470 pages long. This was back in chapter 25. He was going to Jakku, and as far as I'm aware, he was mentioned once by Singer, but we saw him go to Jakku and then never saw him again. And we never saw him again because he died basically going into Jakku, and we never got to find out until just now. And Jazz is absolutely crushed. And what I liked about this, again, kind of, I'm jumping forward again to the kind of everybody's drinking at the bar scene at the end. Jazz is crushed, yes, because they had some sort of romantic entanglement. But she talks to Singer later and says, like, yeah, it hurts. But, you know, she admits that she and John were never going to work out, that they just had some kind of playful fling going. But what hurts her more than that is that he died trying to go get to her. He died trying to do something for her. She sees that as a debt she can't repay. And Singer calls her on it and says, it's as if all life is to you is a series of debts and payments of debts. And Jazz is like, that's exactly how I see it. What we're seeing with so many of these characters, with Nora and now with Jazz, is we get the end of Jazz's plot, right? All of the story threads that Jazz had in these books are resolved. Her dealings with other bounty hunters, even though we don't see her pay off her debt, we see her be in a position where she can. We see how her relationship with John ends up. But now she has to deal with finally having a debt that she knows she can never repay, and what that means, and how this ties into how she sees that her Aunt Sugi may not have been completely wrong, and, you know, you want to have these interpersonal relationships, but that can create this kind of debt, and how she's going to deal with it. And it's not something we get to see, and it's something I would like to see too, the continued adventures of Jazz, and especially Embo, because Embo's one of my favorite Star Wars characters of all time. It's just, again, it's interesting how there seems to be the conclusion of the story for now without the full conclusion of the character arc. This is, again, another character where we're denied seeing where she's going to go. Again, rewinding to a little bit earlier in the chapter, there's discussions on celebrations of victory, and how people are in the streets championing the destruction of the Empire, and how it's different to what happened in the celebrations after Return of the Jedi. And you may remember way back in the very first Aftermath book, the very first interlude, the very first prologue, whatever it was called in that book, was people celebrating after the death of the Emperor on Coruscant. And that celebration turned into a protest because the Imperial police on the planet came to shut down the celebrations. And it talks about how this doesn't happen, that this time the Empire is gone and people can actually celebrate in peace, and how the end at Return of the Jedi wasn't really the end, but this can finally feel like the end, and this can finally feel like the light at the end of the tunnel for the people of the galaxy. Maybe not for all the characters in the book, but at least for the galaxy as a whole. The next bit addressed is one of my favorite things to talk about. Baby Ben Solo is born. He has been birthed. I think it's interesting when they describe him being born. One, there's all these legends around it, right? And I thought it was interesting that Wendig did it this way. It was probably partly done this way because it's very artistic to do it this way, The more cynical side of me says it was done this way because Lucasfilm didn't want it set in stone how baby Ben was born, and so they made him do it this way. I don't know which one's true. Either one is fine with me, I suppose, because I ultimately like the product we got. But, there's stories that he popped right out of there and it was no problem. There's other stories where Leia was in labor for 3 days, and one thing that I thought was interesting is there was the idea that Luke Skywalker was there. Then some people were like, no, he wasn't. He was still on his mysterious journey. And that was something I had been thinking about this whole book, is we saw Han and Leia. We even heard from Lando. We heard from Chewie, but at no point do we hear from Luke Skywalker. And obviously they were keeping that a mystery because they really didn't give us anything about Luke Skywalker until we saw The Last Jedi. So it was a very intentional choice, but I liked all these swirling myths that no one really knows what happened with Ben Solo, and we don't even really get to know what happens with Ben Solo. But we also get this very intimate moment with Han and his son, and Han is trying to give him this speech and be like, I'm not going to be the best dad, but I'm going to make sure we're always pointed on the right course. And then as soon as he does that, like, Ben starts crying, he doesn't know what to do, and Leia's like, yo, he's your kid, like, hold him. And I liked the line that I smuggle, I don't snuggle. I thought that was cute. They have this really nice moment together. And what's interesting, what's talked about there, is that Han is intensely jealous because both Ben and Leia have the Force, and they're always going to have this bond that he will never have with his son. And it's left at a hopeful point, right? Leia is saying that they will have a bond because they're father and son. But I think it can kind of go to why when we see Kylo in the sequel trilogy, especially in The Force Awakens, he has this intense animosity for his father, but then we see in The Last Jedi where he's going to kill his mother and he hesitates, and I think that can be part of it, that at some level he has this connection with his mother that he can't shut out, but his connection with his father is absolutely something he could shut out or try to talk his way around. And to see that kind of spelled out here was interesting. Another thing I think is really interesting is if you think about it, and it's not spelled out in this book, but we're told effectively that Ben was born on the day the peace treaty was signed. If you believe the one legend where Leia was in labor for 3 days, probably not, because Leia was at the signing and then gave birth, so already it's a little finicky. But Ben was born approximately the day that the peace treaty was signed. Luke and Leia were born approximately when the Empire was formed. So Luke and Leia were born as the Empire was born, and Ben was born as the Empire dies. And that is something very interesting to me as well. Then we hit the everybody hanging out at the bar scene. I've already talked about several of the points here. We find out that Nora is going to go be a flight instructor. The time she's spending with Wedge. Timon, who is now expressly going as Snap, is going to join there as well. Jazz has found her way to kind of pay off her debt. But what's interesting here is she talks about how basically black market and that type of thing is on the rise. We also learn that Mon Mothma has another advisor, this person named Sella. I was reading the name like I should recognize it. I couldn't place it. I did a little Wikipedia research and I found out that he had been in the book. He was one of the people who checked on Mon Mothma during the Liberation Day attack with all the mind-controlled people, and he'd been at some of the meetings in Empire's End. But the real thing is he has a connection to a character that we're going to see in the next book that we do for the book club, and I will address that point when we start Bloodline. And the next thing we get in the scene is Jazz and Cinder talking, which again I had already addressed. So then we get to Nora and Timon, and they're kind of having their post-book talk. And this part really intrigued me too, because of the way Nora's kind of internal narration goes. She talks about justice and revenge, this big thing that she's been on in this whole book, arguably the whole trilogy. It's described not as justice or revenge for Sloane, but justice or revenge on herself. That she realizes that she abandoned her son on Akiva, she hadn't been the best mom, and she so badly was trying to decide if she was deserving of revenge or deserving of justice against her, what that would mean. To me, the way it's described that way means that she was expressing that towards Sloane. That Sloane wasn't really the justice or revenge she was looking for as much as Nora blames the Empire for Nora being away from her family. So, like, yeah, Nora left her family, but if there wasn't for the Empire, then she wouldn't have had to leave, and Brenton wouldn't have been gone. So she was expressing that towards Sloane, but it was really a way of her dealing with what she was feeling towards herself. And Nora hits this point of forgiving herself. So I talked about earlier in this video that I want to see Nora get that conclusion, and like I appreciate that she's forgiven herself, but she says right in the book that maybe it's just the drinks going to her head. The woman got nothing that she was going after in the whole book, and forgiving herself and having her son's forgiveness and having that relationship with her son are all well and good, but like she's hit this point. Now she can live her life, and now we can see this play out. And I just feel like this night is not going to solve basically the PTSD she was dealing with throughout a large portion of the book. It's not going to deal with her overcoming problems and whether or not she can be with Wedge. I still just think it's a really interesting thing that both she and Jazz were denied the endings that they were going for. In some ways, Timon was denied his ending, and that he never really got to fully reconnect with his father, even though we already know where he's going next. It's pretty much just Singer. Like, Singer is the only one that ends the book knowing where he's going and what he's doing, and he's not the character I would have guessed that would know what he's going to be up to after this book. And it's interesting to me, and I wonder if it's that way because Wendig had plans for these characters after, or if he doesn't necessarily, and that was just an intentional choice. Maybe it has some sort of greater meaning that you don't always get the nice, neat endings in war, but at the end of the day, I don't know, just having spent this much time with the characters, I'd like to see a little bit more for them, but I also hope that we get to revisit the Aftermath crew and canon at some point in time. But beyond that, now we have the epilogue in the unknown regions, and this is one of the things I have been waiting all the way over a year ago since we started Aftermath 1 to get to talk to you about. It's Sloane and both the Huxes and a bunch of feral children on a ship, and no, this is not the start to a terrible joke, and they're flying off to a nebula. So Rax mentions that one of the missing Imperial Star Destroyers, the ones that Sloane was reading about back in Life Debt when she goes to the big library that was like a big hole in the ground, she gets told that one of the Star Destroyers is out there hiding. And so she goes with them. And they're stuck in space for months because they're basically going down these uncharted pathways by way of these strange coordinates that Rax has given them. And at first she's worried about these feral children, as anyone would be, and then she realizes they follow Armitage Hux. So she works out a deal with Armitage Hux, which is, you don't turn your feral kids on me, and I will keep your dad off your back. And she goes to get loyalty from Brendel. Brendel attacks her, and then she just beats the snot out of Brendel and is like, yeah, no, you're mine now. You're not going to bother me, and you're not going to bother your son anymore. And you are going to teach your son everything. And so that's kind of this weird, odd family unit, for lack of a better term, that goes and finds the eclipse. And here's another character with Sloane that doesn't get the full resolution to her story, but I actually really like what they did with Sloane. I do like it on its own, but I also like it because obviously they can't tell this whole story yet. She doesn't know what awaits her on the eclipse. She doesn't know if they're going to be loyal to her or not. She just knows that this is her chance to go and forge the Empire. And we haven't really heard from Sloane since. She gets kind of a throwaway reference in The Last Jedi novelization. Novelizations are notoriously ambiguously canon. They're a good interpretation of the script, but things that are put into novelizations are not inherently canon. So just because she got a reference does not necessarily mean we know anything about what's going on with her. So the last we hear from Sloane is she's gone off to a nebula. Now, what's interesting is if you have read Lost Stars by Claudia Gray, Lost Stars eventually hits the Battle of Jakku. And there are characters in it that go off to not the same place, but a similar place, a place that actually gets referenced by Rax when he's like, I have control of the fleets here, 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 and here, before he gives his big speech in this book in Empire's End. He lists off this place, which is where Lost Stars ends. And so there's at least the inkling that the characters we see at the end of Lost Stars and the characters we see, at least on the Imperial side, in Empire's End might eventually meet up. It's not confirmed, at least not as near as I can tell from some research on Wikipedia, but it's interesting. If you haven't read Lost Stars, I highly recommend it. Maybe one day we'll do it for a book club, but considering by the time we do Bloodline, that'll be 4 books in the new canon that are past Return of the Jedi. After we do Bloodline, I want to get out of this time period a little bit. But that's a discussion we can have a couple weeks down the road. But yeah, that's the Aftermath trilogy, everybody. That's how it ends. That's how it goes. This is what we see from the characters. This is the several pages of notes I took on the book. I didn't actually write down the epilogue, I need to, but this is where I kept track of all of our interludes. It all started back here, so there you go. I really don't know what more to say. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts, what you thought on the books as a whole, what you thought about the end of character resolutions, what you would like to see from some of the characters going forward. Just say thank you again for being with me on this journey, because I would never have imagined anybody wanting to read a book with me for over a year. But with that, I'll probably do a separate video announcing that too, but if you're watching this and you want to know, next week we're going to start Bloodline, also by Claudia Gray, just like Lost Stars. This book is widely considered one of the best books in the new canon. Aftermath Trilogy is actually kind of mid-tier popular. I love it. There's a lot of people who really don't. This book, I have never talked to a person that has read this book and didn't like it. Claudia Gray is one of the best authors they have going right now, and I also think that this book might be one of the most important books in the new canon for the sequel trilogy. So I'm really excited to get to this and get through this before we get to the Rise of Skywalker. So next week, next Monday, I'll be doing a video, and I will be talking about the little crawl here at the beginning of the book and Chapter 1. I'm going to keep it nice and easy for the first week, and we're going to go from there. So be ready for that for next week. We're going to keep moving. Like I said, I want to make sure we have enough time to get it done in time for episode 9. If you're not already, if somehow you watch this whole series and you're not already following us on the various social medias, please consider doing that today. And I'll talk to you guys next week.